Good evening. Welcome to Grace and Gavel, where truth meets compassion. Today we're talking about Aileen Wuornos, when mercy was never on the table. Some defendants are tried for their crimes. Others are tried for who they are. Aileen Wuornos entered the justice system already condemned, not only for what she did, but for how little society valued her life before the crimes ever occurred. This is not a story about excusing violence. It is a story about recognizing how class, gender, trauma, and disposability shape who receives mercy and who never does. Wuornos forces us to confront a painful truth. Justice is not blind when empathy is selective. Mitigation versus moral outrage. Mitigation is used to determine things that might have excused the behavior for some reason. For instance, oftentimes there's trauma, or oftentimes there's abuse, like sexual abuse and other things which would essentially go with trauma. There is also the idea that if someone pleads guilty in certain jurisdictions, that is actually held as mitigation, which gives them a lesser sentence, versus moral outrage. And there was a lot of moral outrage given probably who Aileen was, her anger because she had been sexually abused and mistreated for a long time by, I believe, some of her family, some of the neighborhood, because people didn't believe she was the most attractive person. So they abused and ignored her and mistreated her. And so she clearly had a lot of hurt and a lot of anger built up inside of her because she felt like she had to do everything on her own, right? And the moral outrage was that she was killing these men, which is what she was eventually executed for. So she did pay her crime to society. And then also a lot of people see trauma as an explanation, not an excuse. And so oftentimes we look at like battered spouses, for instance. There's a battered spouse defense. There's also similar to kind of like a self-defense defense as well. And trauma is not an excuse, but it can be an explanation for how someone handled their life and how certain things, because trauma does actually change your brain chemistry and how you react to certain situations. Some people may say that's an excuse. Maybe they're lucky enough to not have experienced trauma. But for those who've experienced trauma, know that you will never be the same after experiencing trauma, which is why things like post-traumatic stress disorder are present. People experience a lot of adaptations or coping mechanisms based on what they've experienced with the trauma. Also, there's the idea sometimes that sentencing is not blind, right? It's supposed to do the best that it can do, but it's run by humans, which is oftentimes flawed. So sentencing can sometimes be shaped by social worth, somebody's mannerisms, somebody's etiquette. And Aileen clearly was a person who was mad as heck, right? She had been used, abused, ignored, and mistreated and marginalized her entire life, and she'd had enough. But the thing that's the saddest about this, and I know I've said this in a previous video, is that when she was on death row, she had actually gotten a lot of help. She was actually somewhat regulated. I mean, she was still angry, but she was able to be honest about a couple of the gentlemen that she had murdered and indicated that they weren't trying to harm her or hurt her. So she was in somewhat of a good place before her life was taken by the state of Florida. So in closing, when a system refuses to see humanity, punishment becomes much easier than justice, and that is extremely unfortunate. Thank you for tuning in to Grace and Gavel, where truth meets compassion, and I hope that you will come back and see us again soon. Again, I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.